Welcome back to Quick Take Charge. I'm Tim Stenovec in New York. Well, if you have student debt, how sweet does an executive action by newly minted President Biden to forgive $50,000 in student debt sound? Well, some members of Biden's party are pushing for this. My next guest says that maybe Biden should look abroad for some inspiration on how to do this. Bloomberg News personal finance reporter Charlie Wells is here to explain. Hey, Charlie, happy Friday, and thanks for joining us. Okay, so let's take a step back here. What did President Biden do this week when it comes to student loans, and what more are Democrats pushing him to do?
Great. Well, some members of Biden's party would say, what did he do? Not enough. And one of his first acts in office was actually to extend a freeze on student loan payments until at least September. And this is sort of a continuation of what Trump had been doing throughout the pandemic. Other members of the party have been pushing for Biden to do more, to cancel that $50,000 figure that you mentioned in student debt. And members of the left flank of the Democratic Party have really been pushing Biden to look abroad, to the Nordics, to the Swedens, the Denmarks, the Norways, where college by and large is free and generally student debt loads are lower. However, there is an interesting sort of emerging group of experts and policy advocates who are saying, yes, look abroad, but look here, not there. And for these experts, here is actually where I am in London, England, and Australia, which have some policy secrets, they say, that could actually potentially be easier to implement.
Okay, so let's start in London, where you are. How does it work when it comes to the UK with student loans? And perhaps how should the US, according to the experts you spoke to, look to the UK to stall the student loan
really
crisis here in the US?
Sorry about that. Yes, it's really interesting. Here in the UK, in England in particular, and in Australia, education, tertiary education is not free. Debt forms a significant part of many graduates' lives. These economies are very similar to the US, which makes them sort of easier to compare. And what is really interesting, though, is the way that debt and repayment is structured in the UK and Australia. And so in the United States, as many viewers will know, student loans are structured a lot like mortgages. So you borrow a certain amount and you repay that amount of money over a set period of time. So there are some exceptions, but that's generally how it works. In England and Australia, it's interesting. So repayment is almost entirely income dependent, and you actually don't pay back your student loans if you don't make enough. And in both countries, that's around $30,000 US. And then when you do hit that threshold, when you do have to start making these repayments, it's capped at a certain proportion of your salary, and it would never go above 10%. And so what does that look like in reality? It's really interesting. So student debt still is a significant part of graduates' lives here. It actually might take a bit longer to pay back because some of those payments are smaller. They're capped at 10%, but there's a lot less paperwork, and it changes some financial decisions that people have in these countries.
Well, in your recent piece, you also looked at Australia, you looked at New Zealand, you looked at Canada, and you looked at Ireland. We don't have time to go through all of these, but I want to hit on New Zealand because this sounds like a pretty good model for students. The first year is free as far as fees go, and then loans are actually interest-free while you're a resident in New Zealand. How could the U.S. learn from that policy?
No, that's a really good point. And I think that change was brought in 2018 following the election of Jacinda Ardern, a very popular leader around the world, of course. And it's sort of a try before you buy policy, a sort of, try this with kind of that lower hurdle to entry. If you can make it through that first year, let's see about finding other options. And I think in a lot of ways, there is that push to make community college free. And I think in some ways, there are some parallels. Community college for many is sort of an entryway into tertiary education. So there certainly is some parallel and some overlap there that the U.S. could learn from. And looking at all these other countries, it was just really striking to me, that financial advisors in these countries say, yes, student debt is an issue, but it is not such a dominant force as it is in the U.S.
Charlie Wells, Bloomberg News personal finance reporter. Charlie, it is always great to have you join us on Quick Take. Thanks so much for taking the time. Well, coming up, we're talking marijuana and why 2021 may be a turning point for the industry's presence in the United States. We'll be